All right, folks. So you'll recall essentially that every decision you make is always a cost benefit analysis. So when you were looking at utility, uh, when we were trying to figure out how do people react when they're making choices in terms of marginal benefit, which is their utility, versus the marginal cost, which is obviously the cost of the good, you were able to even it out. So when cost equals benefit, that's when you stop consuming. It's the same sort of idea for firms. So we've been talking about their costs for a bit now. Now we're going to be taking a look at their benefit, which for a business, for a producer, it's profit. So when we're looking at profit, the lowercase pi symbol represents profit. So that's what that symbol is. So sometimes you'll see that as you're going through materials. And profit is just your total revenue minus your total cost. That's it. Total revenue minus total cost. You recall that when we were looking at revenue before, when we were talking about elasticity, you couldn't figure out production levels yet because you didn't have the cost factor in there. You couldn't figure out how much businesses were wanting to produce because you didn't have that cost benefit analysis. You only had the benefit portion. So now we're putting them both together. Total revenue minus total cost equals your profit. And recall, total revenue equals price times quantity. Now, in this, we have to remember that our costs are split up into explicit and implicit costs. A lot of what we have been talking about were explicit costs, things that actually involve laying out money. So everything that we've discussed in terms of labor, machinery, rent, all that stuff is explicit costs. Implicit costs, these are the ones that don't require you to put out money for it. It's measured in value of dollars of the benefits that were foregone. What that tells you is you should be thinking opportunity cost. So the implicit cost is really just sort of another phrasing of opportunity costs. So it's the other thing you could be doing with your resources. And those play into accounting versus economic profit. Accounting profit only includes explicit costs. So it's just total revenue minus total explicit costs. That's it. Economic profit includes both explicit and implicit costs. So it's total revenue minus total explicit and implicit costs. So your accounting profit will always be greater than your economic profit because economic profit includes those implicit costs in it. So when I said previously, like way back when, that firms are okay producing at cost on the supply curve, this is why, because the supply curve is representative of economic costs. So if we ever say that economic profit is equal to zero, that means there is still positive accounting profit because accounting profit doesn't include those implicit costs. And that is the idea of a normal profit. So all of your explicit and implicit costs are covered by your revenue when your economic profit is zero. So if your economic profit is negative, you could still be having accounting profit. But what it tells you is you might be better off switching to a different mode of service or production or something. You could be doing something better with your resources. That's all that says if you have a negative accounting profit. If it's small. If it's large, obviously, then your accounting profit might be negative as well. So it is important to realize that zero economic profit is not a bad thing. It's actually called normal profit because it's the normal mode for a lot of different businesses. And that's something we'll cover when we get to market structures. Now, if we're looking for profit maximization, so now we're getting down to production decisions. How much of a good or service should a firm produce? For this, you have to do that marginal benefit versus marginal cost analysis. So as more output is sold at a constant price, total revenue and total cost will both be rising. Uh, the goal of your firm is to find out where your profit is, your economic profit, that is maximized. And to do that, as I said, you look at your marginal revenue, which once again is your change in total revenue divided by your change in quantity. Normally, when we do this, the change in quantity will be 1. So as a shortcut, normally you can do the change in total revenue. This is compared with your marginal cost, which is the idea that additional unit of cost in terms of your change in total cost divided by your change in quantity. Once again, change in quantity is normally 1. So if you think about your production, your marginal revenue starts out high and starts falling. Your marginal revenue will fall as you produce more. Your marginal cost will rise as you produce more. If you're thinking, I produce 3 units of a good and my marginal revenue is $10 and my marginal cost is 2, I'll produce that because I'm making $10 of revenue and at $2 of cost. So my benefit there is 8, my total benefit, net benefit, I should say. If I produce the next unit, if I produce 4, then my marginal revenue falls. Maybe it went from 10 to 5, and my marginal cost rises, and it goes from 2 to 3. Well, now my net benefit has changed. It's fallen because the marginal revenue fell and my marginal cost rose. But my marginal revenue was still greater than my marginal cost, so I produced that. In the next one, maybe I produce my 5th unit, and my marginal revenue is equal to 450, and my marginal cost is equal to 450. Well, that's my stopping point, because now if I produce one more of that good, my marginal revenue will fall further and my marginal cost will rise more. This means that it would no longer be profitable to produce that one extra unit of the good. So you produce as long as your marginal revenue is greater than your marginal cost. And this brings us to our optimal output rule. It's your marginal cost equals your marginal revenue. This is absurdly important in microeconomics. You need to make sure you know this rule. No matter what, if a firm is left up to its own devices, it will produce an output at marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Now, it's important that's the output, that's the quantity. It's not necessarily the price. So, marginal cost equals marginal revenue will always get you your output. Sometimes you'll see it phrased as your profit maximizing output. Sometimes you'll see it phrased as your cost minimizing output. It's all the same. It's what a firm will produce if left to its own devices. Now, if you look at this graphically, we have here a horizontal marginal revenue curve. So in this case, the price is constant. The price of the good is constant. Now, this isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes the marginal revenue will be downward sloping, as I discussed in my previous example. If it's horizontal like this, if it's perfectly elastic, the analysis is still the same. It stays the same while marginal cost rises. So all you have to do is look at the intersection of your marginal revenue and your marginal cost curve. Where they intersect, that tells you your profit maximizing quantity. In some cases, it can tell you the price if it's perfectly elastic, but if it's downward sloping, it does not. That's something that we will get into later with market structures. We'll talk about that more later. So don't worry about market price so much now. Just worry about the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost to get you your profit maximizing quantity. Now, when is production profitable? So you earn that economic profit. Economic profit is the important phrase there. When it's greater than 0, you should continue to operate. If your economic profit is less than 0, so if you are earning below a normal profit, the firm should consider permanently closing and moving resources to their next best alternative in the long run. In the short run, you can't do that because there are fixed costs that you can't get rid of in the short run. So shutting down is or exiting the market, I should say, would be a long run decision, not a short run decision. we will go over long versus short run decisions once again when we do market structures, because it'll be a little bit tailored to the different structures themselves. And that's it for profit maximization. It's just as easy as MC equals MR equals your optimal output rule.